See, in this session, we'll be seeing how the deployment works in the front end, as in how do we deploy our front end. Okay, and primarily we will be using AWS and CICD for that. So first thing first, why do we need to deploy our app? I've already created an application and it works perfectly fine on my local host. So now what is the need of deploying our application? So a very simple answer for that is we want to go global, right? We haven't created the application for ourselves. It is for others. So in order for others to use this application, there must be a way that they are able to use that. So for that, we do deploy our application on various platforms. So there are multiple ways. We'll just look onto those ways one by one today. So, okay, we got the idea like deployment is necessary, but how do we do it? Like, what are the prerequisites? What is the checklist that we need to fulfill in order to deploy our application? So, first thing is you need three things. First thing is you need a build folder. I'm going to explain what these three things are in very detail in the next slide, but just to have a checklist, we need a build folder, we need a remote location, and we need a CDN. Now let's see what these things are one by one. Now the first thing is the build folder. So let's say I've created a React application. There are multiple files and folders in this. So there is a source folder, there is node modules folders, there is package.json file and every other file. But it's not like each one of this file are getting into the server as it is. So there is a whole lot of process that comes when you want to deploy your application. Basically, there is a command called as npm run build or yarn run build. You run this command on the root of your directory so as to create a build folder. Now this build folder is actually the package that has been created after compiling, minifying and doing many other process, basically integrated all of your component, your static files, dynamic files, scripts, everything into one index.html, and basically this is the file which works on the server. So everyone got the idea of this build folder. You just need to run this command npm run build or yarn run build, and this folder would be created by the React server or the compiler itself. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, moving ahead, next thing is we need a remote location or a remote storage. So why do we need it anyway? See, I have a system with a specific configuration. Like I have 1 TB of hard disk, 4 GB of RAM, and a few other configuration. But this is not very scalable. Let's say I deployed my application on on this system right now, but over the period of time, the users of the application keeps on increasing. Right now, I don't have that much capacity in my server to fulfill all these requests. I don't want user to make an API call and wait for a while because my system got hanged. It's not able to fulfill all these requests. So because of that, we need a remote location which is very reliable and scalable at the same time. You know, I can increase or decrease size of my storage size so as to incorporate more files in the future, right? So for that, we need a remote storage or location. Now in our case, if we talk about AWS, we have S3 bucket. So as I explained earlier, we'll be using AWS because this is the most popular and the easiest way of deploying front-end application till date. So S3 bucket is a service provided by AWS which is advertised as infinitely scaled storage. Okay, it is said that theoretically, you can insert any amount of data in an S3 bucket. Okay, now how does this S3 bucket store the data? It basically stores every data in the form of objects. Objects are nothing but files in buckets. So buckets is the terminology that we used for directories here. Okay, so while creating a bucket, few things we need to keep in mind is that bucket name should be globally unique. So it's like you are creating a URL, and we all know that for a URL, for a domain of a URL needs to be unique. That's why a bucket name needs to be unique. Okay, and buckets are always defined as at a regional level. So this bucket is actually located somewhere. So you need to define where you want this bucket to be located. It's actually a physical location. Now let's see how this work in AWS. Like how do we do that? How do we create an S3 bucket? Now for this you need to have an AWS account with you. I'm not going to explain in this lecture like how do we create an AWS account because it's a whole other topic. I'm assuming all of us have this AWS account and you just need to search for the service S3 and you'll find that from the list and open it. Right now I have this S3 management console in front of me. You'll see an orange button of creating a bucket. You just need to create this, click on this button. You need to give the name of the bucket. Now let's see, I've given the name test bucket. Now I don't have bucket with this name in my AWS account, but this doesn't mean that it will allow me to create this bucket. Now let's see if it allows us or not. I click on the submit button and it says bucket name with the same name already exists. It does exist, but not in my account, but in some other person's account. So that's why it is said that the bucket name should be globally unique. So let's say I've given this, probably not anyone will have this name. Then we need to specify the region. So it is a standard practice that you have to select the region which is closest to your user. So let's say if I'm in India and most of the applications user are from India, then I'll select a region which is in India. Okay, so as to reduce the latency of for all the requests. Now there are some other configurations, but for us the most important one is the block public access. So this is in regards of the security, like we don't want to make our bucket public. Public buckets are those buckets in which any user with a URL is able to access your data. Obviously in most of the cases we don't want that. So make sure we don't uncheck this particular checkbox. It needs to be checked. Okay. Then there are some other configuration. In most of the cases, we'll leave them to the default. Okay, then we just need to click on this create button. It is as simple to create a bucket, and you'll see the list of all the created buckets here in the buckets list. So bas, that's it. That's all you have to do. So once the bucket is created, you can open the bucket and basically you can upload your build folder into this bucket. Now this bucket is globally available to you. You can access it from anywhere. So does it means that our application is hosted now? Are we able to access it globally? This might be the case, but we want something else as well. Let's see what else is remaining. Again, now from our checklist, we are 2 points done, right? We have a build folder and we have a remote location. Now, why do we need a CDN? So CDN is basically short for Content Delivery Network. It's a kind of network which allows you to serve users' requests with minimum latency. So basically AWS has a concept of edge locations. Edge locations are almost 216 points that are distributed all across the globe which serves users' requests. Now, how does it serve users' requests? Basically, it works on the concept of cache. Let me explain a little bit more about this CloudFront here. So in AWS, CDN is implemented with the help of CloudFront. So CloudFront is the name of that service. Okay, why do we use CloudFront? Because it improves our read performance and content is cached at the edge location. So what happens is in the CloudFront, whenever you create a CloudFront distribution, you specify which S3 bucket to watch. Okay, so you decide like, okay, CloudFront, I'm asking you to watch this particular training bucket, and whenever I upload some content into the training bucket, whenever my user requests something from the training bucket, you are the one who is going to fetch the data from the training bucket and serve it to the user. Why do we want CloudFront to do this? Because CloudFront has the edge locations which are closest to the user. Now let's say I have created the application and I have created a bucket in Mumbai region. Now let's say a user from California is trying to access that bucket. But you can see there is a huge geographical distance between my user and my origin. So there must be some latency in delivering the data, right? So to avoid this latency, what we do is the user's request is passed to the closest edge locations. Now the closest edge location would not be of the Mumbai, but somewhere near around to California. Okay. Now let me explain this with the help of a diagram. Let's see, we have this client here and we have this AWS edge location. So whenever client requests something, it goes to the edge location. Now if the edge location has the cache data into this, it will serve the request from here only. It won't go to the origin. But now consider a case when edge location doesn't have the updated data or the time to live session is expired. So it means that the edge location has old data and the data in the origin hasn't been updated. So in that case, what happens is edge location makes a request to your origin. In our case, it's the S3 bucket. S3 bucket would return the updated data, and once the updated data is written to the edge location, it caches that data so that the next time it won't have to go back to origin. Edge location would itself be able to serve the data to the client. So this is how it increases the speed. So in order to reduce the latency. Now we have already seen like how do we create an S3 bucket. Now let's see how do we create a CloudFront distribution. So similar to how we search for the S3 bucket, we'll search for CloudFront. This is the CloudFront console. You can see the option of create distribution here. Click on this button. Now the first thing that we need to specify is which origin domain we want to use. Origin in our case is the S3 bucket, right? Because the S3 bucket is actually the location where our build files are stored. So we need to specify which S3 bucket we want to use. Now let's say for this example, I'm using this bucket. You'll see that some of the fields are predefined. Most of the settings here will be leave by default. Few things we need to change, as in we need to change this viewer protocol policy. Why? Because most of the time we need to implement HTTPS. So we want that even if the user is requesting the server from an HTTP endpoint, we want to convert it into HTTPS because it is the more secure way of doing things. So you just need to change this, redirect HTTP to HTTPS. Though this is not mandatory, but this is the one which is recommended. Leave all the settings default. Then this one is the most important thing next. We need to specify default root object. Now default root object simply states that whenever your application opens, which is the initial page that you want to serve. So in most of the front-end application, it's the index.html page that we serve. So you just need to write index.html and just create the distribution. So all the other things here are not mandatory. You can fill it out if you feel so, and you can edit it later as well. So once you create the distribution, it creates multiple edge, it basically populates the data to the multiple edge locations and everything takes into place. Now it might take 10 to 15 minutes to create a distribution and to create it in working. So it might take 15 minutes to come to working. Okay. Now once the distribution is created, this CloudFront automatically gives you a domain name. Okay. Now this domain name, with the help of this domain name, you can simply copy this out and paste it in your browser. You'll be able to access your application. And what all things we have done till now is actually free. You don't have to pay a single penny for this. So we do have to pay something, but not for a very small period of time. S3 is free for a year, and we have to pay according to the data that is transmitting out of the S3 bucket. But if your application is very small, you don't have to pay that amount of fee. So CloudFront here is also free. As far as you are transferring data in and out of the same region, you don't have to pay a penny here. Okay. So this is all about how do we do deployment with S3 bucket and CloudFront. Now consider a scenario like till now everyone got this much, right? We have to create a build folder, upload it onto the S3 bucket, and create this CloudFront distribution and updates it again and again. Is this much clear, guys?
Yes.
Or do we have any doubt?
Actually, I was wondering, does we have to pay for this cache storage or not?
No, no. So See, CloudFront is one service in a whole. So if you are paying anything, it's for the CloudFront. And if you want to implement cache or not, it all comes with the CloudFront. And for your use case, if it's very minimal use case, you don't even have to pay a single penny. I've created almost 10 to 15 buckets and 10 to 15 CloudFront distributions till now, and I haven't paid anything, even though our application is live. Like we have login, we have leads, but we haven't paid anything yet,
Okay.
because it's all about the use cases, right? If your users are increasing, then you might have to pay fee, but most of the cases it's very cheap as compared to other deployment options. And this cache is the heart of the CloudFront, so we don't have to pay anything extra for the cache. Any other doubt, guys? Okay, let's move ahead. So we got this much, like every time we want to deploy our application, we have to create a build. We want to update the build on the S3 bucket, and we'll just refresh the distribution. In the AWS world, it is called as invalidation. Okay, but see what happens if I want to deploy my application twice or thrice a day. Sometimes it happens, right? We have some production bugs and we want to resolve it right away. There might be some urgent bugs that needs to be resolved as soon as possible. So in that case, there is a lot of manual work going on right now, isn't it? Like I have to run the command, I'll run yarn run build, I'll wait for 5 minutes or 10 minutes depending on the size of the build, and then I'll have to manually go and run the command which would upload all my files to the S3 bucket, and then I'll create the invalidation. So this is a whole lot of manual process that I'm doing right now. So how can we avoid this manual process? So very simple answer to this is implementing CI/CD. So CI/CD stands for continuous integration and continuous deployment. How does it work is, so oftentimes you see that whenever we are creating some application in a group, or even if you are creating an application on your own, we use some version control system like GitHub, GitLab, something like this, right? So these this what we can say version control providers, they provide something called as pipelines. So these pipelines are built on top of Jenkins, and this helps us to create an automated pipeline sort of thing. So now what I have to do is I just have to mention the branch for which the GitLab will look into. Let's say I have created a staging branch and I want the GitLab to look onto that branch. Like every time I'm pushing something onto that branch, my GitLab will automatically run a pipeline, create a build, deploy that build on my S3 bucket, and create an invalidation. So now as a developer, my work is reduced very much. Earlier I have to create the build, I have to run the command to deploy, but now I just have to push my code to a branch and GitLab or GitHub is taking care of all of these things from behind. Now if you are using AWS here, there is something called as code commit and code pipeline in AWS. So it's very specific to what your companies are using, but we have this option with the version control providers here. Okay, so I'll be taking the example of GitLab here. So in GitLab, let's say you have a branch. What you have to do in order to enable this CI/CD pipeline, you just have to create a file called gitlab.ci.yaml file. Now this is actually the configuration file. If you have written this file, every time you have pushed something onto the branch, this file would run and basically enables your deployment. Now there are few configurations that we have to make. I'll let you know. So this is how a simple GitLab file look like, YAML file look like. So there are few things we need to specify. Like first thing we need to specify is which image you want to use. Now guys, consider this. Eventually you want your application to run on a remote server. Now this remote server is nothing but a machine. In order for this machine to run your application, it must have the same setup that you have on your local, right? So for a React application to run, what all things we need? First we need Node, we need NPM. So we need a server which has all of these things pre-installed, correct? So for that I used a Docker image. Okay, then I need to specify how do I access my particular AWS account, because my S3 bucket and CloudFront distribution are specific to my account. So I have to tell GitHub like, okay bro, you need to log into this account and then you have to upload the files on this particular S3 bucket. So for that we use environment variables here. Obviously we don't want anyone with this file to know what our actual credentials are, because those things are secret, right? So I've just mentioned the variables using the environment variables. Okay. Then creating a pipeline is creating multiple jobs. Okay. The entire deployment process doesn't happen in one go. There are multiple stages in it. So in first stage, we create a build. So we have specified multiple stages, like first there would be a build stage, there would be a test stage, and there would be a deploy stage. So let's see what has to be done in each step. So before every stage or before the setup, first thing we need to do is we need to configure AWS CLI. Now there are multiple ways of uploading your build folder to AWS. You can directly go over the console and use the UI interface to upload, or you can directly upload your files from your terminal. So now in this case, no one, so this is an automated way, right? So there is no one on our behalf to will who will open the management console and click on the user interface. So this is kind of an automated way. That's why we are going to use this AWS CLI. So first we need to set up the AWS CLI, then comes the build stage. Okay, so how do we create a build in our local system? We run two commands: yarn install for installing all the dependencies, and yarn build to create the build. Okay, so the same command we are telling GitHub like, okay GitHub, on this in this build stage you have to run these two commands in order to create your build folder. Now once this is done, your build folder is ready. Next is the test stage. Now, if you have written any test cases in your React folder, or maybe in your build folder in your entire application, if you have run any test cases, you might want to check, right? Like all of those test cases are passing or not. So for that, we have this test stage. So you just have to write the command, what command you use for running the test case. And generally in React, we use yarn run test. So maybe you could write that in the script. Now there is something called as refs. So refs is where you mention the branch which you are asking GitHub to watch onto. Okay, here it's the master branch. It means every time I'm pushing something onto master, this GitLab file will run. Okay. Now the last stage is this deploy stage, where actually I have to run the command, the AWS CLI command, which is responsible for uploading my build folder on the particular S3 bucket. Okay, so with this file you have automated a lot of the manual tasks that you were doing earlier, and you don't have to be a very frequent or fluent in YAML configuration in order to write this file. You can simply write basic YAML file for GitLab, so it will give you this pre-written template. You just have to modify the configuration according to your need. So you don't have to be very god of YAML in order to write this file. This is very, very simple. And with these few steps, we have actually automated a lot of our manual work. Okay. Any guys so far, guys? Any doubts so far? I'm done from my side here.